through sharing some of the current situations, the challenges, the opportunities, and potential solutions available to the market that we have here in Thailand. So for our next segment, staying ahead of the curve is key to retailers' success with all the changes that retail has undergone. Retailers need to evolve and adapt to change by optimizing their retail planning and supply chain to succeed in this competitive market. In our next session, I'll have the honor of moderating a panel discussion to discuss this further. May we invite our panelists and our panelists of speakers, Paul Howe from SeminarGroup, David Bray from Logic Info, and once again David Madden from Relic Solutions to the front for this session.
We're just going to turn the chairs around.
I'm going to do a brief introduction of the panelists here that haven't spoken yet, but I'll also ask you folks to give a brief introduction yourself. So we have Paul Howe, who's currently working as Group CIO at SeminarGroup and Lotus under CP Group. He has over 30 years of experience in the field of information technology and has a diverse background in enterprise computing and corporate settings, with extensive experience in implementing and integrating retail and wholesale solutions. David Bray is a partner for Asia Pacific at Logic Info and a highly experienced leader. He has worked with global market-leading software companies and has helped companies with transformation initiatives that add real value. But I think it's better that you hear from themselves.
Hello. Okay. So, welcome everyone. I'm Paul. I'm the CIO at SeminarGroup and now Lotus as well. We are doing a lot of great things at Macro and Lotus that now drive our business forward, and it's good to meet everyone. Thank you.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here. David Bray. I've worked in retail for over 25 years, and as Duco said, with a focus on working with leading retailers in transformational projects centered around not just technology, but also understanding process and people behind that. A lot of time spent in Thailand and Asia Pacific, and work on both the software vendor side as well as the delivery side, working for Logic at the moment. We're a very specialised retail systems integrator where we work with leading retailers to be able to deploy software projects, but then also support that software through the rest of the use of the business, because adoption and use of the software is as important as delivering it.
All right, thanks. So to kick off this panel, we'll be looking at several key topics around the future of retail planning, supplier-retailer collaboration, and sustainability. So for the panel here, I'm going to ask a few targeted questions and a few open-ended questions. And then I'll let whoever's most eager answer the questions, basically. And after that, just so the audience is aware, that's when we'll open up the panel to a Q&A session. I'd rather I not ask all the questions here, especially with such a big panel that we have up here across the various perspectives. So I'll just get the ball rolling here, and we talk about the future of retail planning. So this one's supposed to be open-ended, but I suspect one person might have a stronger point of view on this. So for the panel, how do you see the transformation from traditional to modern retail? Modern retail could mean omnichannel, it could mean just a change in consumer behavior play out in Thailand. So how do you see the changes or changes and impacts affecting your business?
Well, I'm the only one with the business insight. So I mean, the question is, how is it changing here? I think we're seeing the modernisation of Thailand, the digitisation of Thailand. I think I know there's a lot of retailers in the mix here, they can see it themselves. The change is happening gradually, but it's happening. I think we're seeing a lot of even like the mum and pop stores are starting to digitize. The demand on the big retailers is changing dramatically. The expectation from our consumers is that they get stock on time, they get a good experience in the store, we understand them, we personalise to them. I think the Thai consumer is changing their expectation. I think I came here 10 years ago, and it was a very different world back then. You know, e-commerce was minimal, literally. Now it's gone up a lot, and some companies are doing 30% of their online, their income's online, and that's the change we're seeing. And I think it's important to understand that if we have that change, our processes and our systems need to keep up with all of that.
Awesome, thanks, Paul. David, maybe you have some insight here working across different retailers in Thailand. Have you noticed any changes over the couple of years?
Yeah, I think like Paul said is correct. The challenge is that the consumers for a while have been moving faster than the retailers and have adopted digital technology a lot faster. And so the real challenge for retailers in this market, and really any market, is how do I actually move faster and try to keep up with these consumers and actually understand what they're wanting to do and how they want to engage with me, whether it's on the device, in the store, on the computer, whatever way they want, whether I want to buy today or next week. And the challenge for the retailer is how do I be agile enough to be able to change my internal process to be able to align to deliver against that consumer expectation.
Awesome, thanks for that. And to follow up there, we talk about the future of Thai retail. Do you think the role of brick and mortar is the same post-COVID, or do you have an opinion that the role of brick and mortar has changed post-COVID? Anyone?
I'll start since I've got the one. I think bricks and mortar now, in terms of the post-COVID world, can actually be a tactical advantage if you use it correctly. So fundamentally, there are stores out there, and if you can actually change the way that your stores are engaging with those consumers, things like being able to do click and collect, do order fulfillment from different stores, and use the bricks and mortar and the inventory in those stores as an advantage to actually provide better customer service without sacrificing and maybe leaving those out of stocks. So David talked about how you balance that inventory across all those different silos. Well, a very important part of that is how do I do that across my brick and mortar stores?
I think so. There's a story that just a couple of weeks ago we were visiting a retailer in Malaysia. We saw that they're establishing dark stores within the stores, very big store concept. So they reserve some of the area just for picking and shipping. And we were told, we saw the situation there, just growing so quick that they completely ran out of space. Now they had to move the whole dark store to a different, bigger store with more space. I mean, that means a lot of change management, of moving people and changing it. So I think just from that perspective, right, what does that mean for that specific in these stores? The layout, the people, the process that happen in the store. I think it has changed, and I think it will change more. But I think it's also a question that everybody can ask ourselves: how do you change how you buy? For myself, yes. So after Corona, I noticed certain different patterns of changing availability, checking availability and prices. I think it's true for many people. So I think the buying behavior has changed, yes.
And with the buying behavior changing and kind of like the landscape going through the shift, whether you call it organic or inorganic, what impact do you think this has on the supply chain? Do you think that this has created a situation where you need to change? Or has the change in consumer behavior not really changed very much from a supplier DC perspective in terms of maintaining that availability? Is it business as usual, or have things changed?
Okay, so things have changed dramatically in the stores for retailers. The situation is that your store is now an omni-channel store. It's not just about people walking. Because in the old days, it was, I hate to say this, retailers used to have an adapt to us mentality, meaning that we expect the person to adapt to the way that we work. But in the new world, we have to adapt to the consumer. And what this simply means is that right now from your store, you've got people picking in your store, and you've got consumers coming in. So when you actually start to lay out your stores, it changes the way you lay out your stores. Suddenly you've got pickers interacting at the same time as customers. The other thing that it highlights is that what used to be issues around availability that you didn't used to see. We never used to see availability issues. Now we see it because we have digitized the store. We can see the stock on the shelf. We know that pickers are not getting their stock. Whereas before, we didn't really see the lost sales from the consumer. Now we see it. And so suddenly the availability discussion goes right up. We need to hit a very high level of availability across the store. So this is one of the big changes that has happened through digitization. COVID's pushed it along very much faster for us to run.
I have a follow-up question to that. So, Paul, what impact has technology had on improving your availability and your forecasting ability? And what does an improved forecast do for your business, I guess?
So you have to remember, macro is a multi-channel, multi-customer group business. So we have mom and pop stores, we have HoReCa, we have distributors, we have police stations, we have everything. Yeah. And they all shop. So for us, customer segmentation is key. So the first thing that is to segment your customers around. And then that drives every other decision in your business. E.g., it drives the assortment you put in a location. It even drives the way that you set up your postcodes. So when you talk about forecasting, you have to forecast not just for the location, you've got to forecast, okay, where is the postcode that I'm delivering to? What is the channel I'm delivering down? What is the customer group I need to forecast for? Because, we have salespeople who walk out, who go and visit shops. They need a forecast to drive. That forecast needs to roll up into all the other channels. So when David talked about the forecasting by channel, it's becoming really, really important in the modern world. And also forecasting by customer group is becoming really important. That's really changed. Previously, retailers just used to do item location forecast by day. Very boring. And now it's changed a lot to go much more sophisticated, where you've got to go and think carefully about your customer and what you're going to offer in that location. So this is the key.
Yeah, then I was going to ask either David, maybe you have a point of view from outside of Thailand. What have you seen?
I think fundamentally the challenge Paul talked about, which is moving from that location store planning or forecasting to move to this true omni-channel thing where you're looking at every consumer and trying to segment that and how they're buying. It's impossible to do that just using human brain power. And so the challenge is you have to look at systems and advanced systems to be able to do that. But then how do I actually incorporate those systems into my business and take advantage of the business knowledge that I have as a retailer that I differentiate myself with, and use that knowledge to actually drive those systems and use them better than anybody else. Because everyone can have the same tool, but some people are better at using it than others. And so it's adoption of that, and how do I use the software to be able to get to that advanced level of forecasting that's really required to be able to engage with consumers now.
And David, that's a really good point. So it's not just buying a fancy new tool, it's about adopting it. In your experience, I know that you work with a number of vendors across multiple enterprises across pretty much the world from a logic perspective. What would be some tips you could give to the audience and some best practices you might be willing to share regarding, user adoption, ensuring success after you buy a solution, whatever that may be?
I think there's a few. One of the first, that's probably the most important, is an executive vision and sponsorship. Because fundamentally, if you don't have the passion at the top end to say this is something that we believe is going to change our company and enable us to do it better, and drive that down through the business, then the project will still become an IT project, and no disrespect to CIOs or IT vendors, but fundamentally, if the business don't adopt it, and that's from that strategic leadership perspective, then typically any initiative is going to fail. And then you need to start looking at things like change management, and what does it mean when I put this solution in or this new tool in, compared to what the people used to do how are they going to be able to train to be able to take advantage of this, and then for them to actually start to train the system and use the system better? That's some thoughts.
Thanks, David. Thanks, David. So, all right, being mindful of time here, so I'm going to go shift gears a little bit. So we heard a lot about forecasting, supply chain, the future of the state of retail. Now we're going to do a deep dive, and I think David touched upon it a little bit here. And personally myself, just to give you a little background, I cover the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam. The number one question I do here, or the number one concern tends to be, why should we listen to you about your supply chain solutions? The main problem is that my vendors don't supply anything. That's what's affecting my availability. So let's go narrow down this topic a little bit more. So with vendor fill rates being a prominent issue across Thailand and broadly speaking Southeast Asia, what are some ways, I guess I'll do this to David Relax, what are some ways you see retailers increasing their vendor fill rates?
Yeah, I think this was one of the main topics I tried to address as well. I think collaboration, and it doesn't have to be full-blown, very complicated processes where you elaborate KPIs, communication, recap meetings daily. It can be already a systematic approach to share long-term forecasts, specifically also with smaller suppliers, can already make a big difference. I know that many companies, and that's outside of what I've talked, also try to establish processes that are not necessarily the typical collaboration, but more around penalizing suppliers for not delivering. It's also a methodology that I think has worked in the past, but of course maybe a bit more touchy, depending on the supplier, specifically if you end up with a shortage sometimes. But these are strategies I've seen. My personal experience has been that long-term planning and systematic approach to share information is something that's quite important.
Awesome. Paul, David? Okay. Cool. So now changing gears, just so I want to cover the wide breadth of experience in the audience here. Paul had mentioned that availability has been a really bubbling topic, whereas maybe in the past it really wasn't a major concern. So we've talked a lot about supply chain from a supplier, distributor, and store perspective. Just want to shift gears here and talk a little bit more micro and macro, no pun intended, Paul. Basically, what I want to ask the panel here is from a space perspective, when I say space, just so the audience knows, I'm talking about using your floor plans and your planograms. Does that have an impact on availability whatsoever?
I think everyone knows it does. So think about it as a simple example. You go into a store. We have the stock in the back room, but we don't have it on the floor. And this is what everyone here has experienced. We know this. Now, if you use planogramming correctly, you can basically make sure you have enough supply on the store for at least 1 full day or 2 full days of people coming in to get the stock. This is kind of the aim. The old days of retailing, we used to sell the space. Everyone remembers that. We used to sell the space. We sold the space. But that's really for our benefit. It's not for the customer benefit. So we need to change everything to be the customer benefit. So the space layout is more about now availability. It's just availability for people to pick to get there because we have the stock, but it's not where it needs to be in the store. So this is kind of the big part about where planogramming is changing.
I think it's really important to understand that the decisions that are being made, especially around things like assortments, will have a dramatic impact on availability because if there's decisions being made in terms of shelf layout and removing facings, adding facings, adding a product or deleting a product, if you don't link that back into what you're doing from a supply chain planning perspective, then you're going to drive availability and out of stock straight away. Because if you're adding new products in and the supply chain planning team aren't aware that this product is going to add to the shelves in enough advance time, then you're probably going to run out of stock at some point very soon. The same as if you're doing promotional end caps and those type of things. How do you tie all those different activities you're doing in the store back to the supply chain planning process so you ensure that you've got extra stock coming when it needs, but then you also tail off the orders, either turning off the promotion or the end cap, or removing the facings or removing the assortment.
The quick addition, this is something we've been talking about before I moved away from Germany. Quite a number of retailers. If you change your assortment, if you change your planograms, how can you make sure that at the right time you have not just the right amount of goods, but also the people that stack those shelves? So you do that, you have a minor major review, you change all your facings, all of a sudden you have a significant increased demand, you have an increased capacity requirement. If this doesn't fit together, you suddenly end in stock out for a period because you're changing some of your assortment and it didn't quite play together with the other processes. It's not an easy task, but something that we'll talk about unified planning that's being worked on quite a bit at the moment.
I guess it's the shameless plug, David. So tell us a little bit more about Unified.
I think it's basically already the idea is how can we use forecasts, and again it goes into end-to-end visibility to steer other processes. How can we use delivery projections to optimize our planograms? How can we use planning more information beforehand in the supply chain planning? Should we consider the impact of increased facings onto the forecast, for instance? So this is a very simple way of saying it. In practice, establishing the processes and considering this is not a very easy task. It's not just like that. We talked about this earlier, change management, utilizing these solutions and harmonizing them is a continuous task. It's a long-term task. So.
Yeah, awesome. So, changing gears again, as we talk through another pressing topic in retail, I want to touch upon sustainability for a minute here. So personally, I read through most of the retailers' investor reports that are public. Sustainability does come up as a huge topic and priority for a lot of the retailers here. So the question is, either for Paul or either we've seen folks, I've seen retailers do things differently overseas. With climate change and the environmental impact of retail becoming a priority, what are some actionable, practical steps retailers can take to make sustainability a profitable priority?
Yeah, it's a big one. I think there's no company out there without the sustainability report. I think we've seen plenty also here in Thailand. We have a sustainability report for service and other things, but practically, how can you use it and break it down away from just a vision and some greenwashing to concrete benefits? That's the only way to establish it, of course. What we've done a while ago was something called, we did a sustainability report with a company called Gaia Research. We actually looked at the certain things that you can improve in the supply chain when it comes to lowering the amount of deliveries, when it comes to reducing shrinkage, that all can be translated into CO2 emissions. But it also has a quite tangible monetary benefit. Fewer deliveries, fewer pickings in the store, less shrinkage, all these things, quite a massive impact on your CO2 footprint, but also on your bottom line. So these are a couple of things that are quite tangible. I'm sure the colleagues have some further examples. Others?
I think for ultra fresh food, it's about reducing the wastage. That's a big issue that we all have. Is how do we bring down the wastage? And I think getting the availability right and forecasting right helps a lot in that. And there's other things you can do, solar panels on the roof, all these things are really useful, but ultimately it's about reducing the wastage.
Yeah, I agree. I'd say waste is certainly one of the areas to focus on, and again, looking at the more advanced ways of potentially doing things. You've got the capability through data and understanding systems that I have stock that it's sitting in my store in my shelves, but the will spoil in 2 or 3 days' time. How do I actually take action now? Using dynamic pricing or something like that to sell it, even though maybe a loss, it's a less loss than throwing it out and throwing it away. So I think using the advanced capability to be able to say, I know this stock's going to go. Let's actually still sell it before it goes at a reduced price, and that will then drive profits. And I think the other area definitely that David talked about is how do I start synchronizing my supply chain so I'm not doing half a pallet one day and then 3 pallets the next day to the same store. How do I smooth that out so it's more optimized in terms of those delivery costs?
I just want to add on wastage in Thailand, it's quite a daunting process. You have to actually cut up the wasted material, take a photo and process it. So getting rid of that and reducing it is so much less work for everyone. So this is kind of one of the keys of where we would see is wastage is one of the key things. It helps the society, but also helps our internal processes as well.
All right, now, if the audience doesn't want to hear me ask more questions, we're going to open up the discussion to the audience here. We have an open Q&A session. I'll hand you over the mic. You can ask a question to the whole panel or to individual people on the panel. I'm aware that everyone could be quite shy at the moment. So, are there any volunteers for the first question? While you have the panel here. All right, we have Kunapa.
Hello, Napat here from Central Food. So probably a question to Mr. Paul. I heard that it's going to be pretty challenging process after you have experience with Relax. How it would be good that to learn more about your visions, right? Like where you want to be from Relax implementation, where are we now, and what is the kind of the challenge that we face? Thank you.
So we don't really normally talk about the software as such. We talk about the process. So currently we're doing an end-to-end process in our business. So we see ourselves doing a transformation right now, and Relax is part of that. So I can't talk about Relax as a self, but in terms of the overall process, everything I've said already, the planning process, the customer segmentation process, the forecasting process, it all builds together. And it's hard to say it's an individual piece. Bottom line, it's going okay, no issue. But we see it as an end-to-end process. It's really the transformation of the supply chain and everything in our business. Does that answer it?
Maybe offline.
Anything else? The audience here? So I'm going to ask a follow-up question. This is for, I think three of you will have a unique perspective here. In terms of relatively quick wins or relatively low-hanging fruit, when I say that, obviously you see us pitching some software to you. It's not a simple transformation, right? But what are some of the tips or advice you can give to some of the audience here about, if I want to improve my business, what are some actionable steps I can take from a supply chain space, or just like, or as Paul said, even spoilage perspective? Is it more mindset? Is it process? It's probably a mix of all of them, but where would you start on the journey?
It's a bit of a loaded question. Sorry.
That's a good question. It's a long question. There's many things. There's one thing that really has the first couple of implementation projects I was a part of, and I've touched on it, seen maybe that it's quite an emotional thing, because I saw there are so many promotions out there that make so much so complicated in the implementation, in forecasting, in the supply chain planning. When it comes to logistics, extra deliveries, there's so much connected to it. If there's actually a big share of those that have no profit impact or hurt their business, whoa, that's something we need to talk about. So now that we, as a company, get more and more into promotion planning, I find this fascinating. I'm not saying this is the lowest hanging fruit and the easiest thing. I know there's politics, supply relations, much connected to it, so it's not just like stop doing stuff. But that's something that has lately fascinated me. It's something where I think there's quite some benefits out there. That's a hard answer.
I think from experience, you get quick wins from doing a project. Typically, from what I've seen in my experience with companies that adopt supply chain solutions, is there's pretty much an immediate impact on the amount of inventory that's in the actual business. Because all of a sudden, the system is actually saying you're buying too much. And so there can be very quick reduction in terms of the amount of inventory that's being held, but then also a decrease in stock, because all of a sudden you're buying more of the right item and less of the wrong item. So the projects can have that benefit in terms of quick win very quickly within a couple of months, just based upon that change in buying pattern. And the buyers start to panic because it's not suggesting I order anything. Well, it's because you've always been ordering too much. And so that's the quick win, I think, is something that instead of looking for that, using a supply chain solution with a very dramatic effect.
I'm gonna shut up in a second. Just one more question. Repeating also something I said, talking about quick wins. Again, visibility and actually opening eyes to the granular measurement of KPIs. I think Paul mentioned something similar as well. I think actually knowing how well you're doing is so important and often overlooked. Often when we start projects, we start measuring weekly and send reports, send it to everybody. And sometimes it's eye-opening for some people in the company how well some things work and others maybe don't. That's something I think that going forward can be a very quick win because it's very hard to improve if you do not know where you're doing well, where you're not doing well. It's very simple.
So I've got the same philosophy. I think that people who know me is KPI driven. You pick the KPI and the quick wins will come. If your KPI is availability, you'll find the quick win. If your KPI is forecast accuracy, you'll find the quick win. I think you have to start with the KPI.
And taking a step back and trying to narrow this down to Thailand, I think Paul and Dave Gray would have a lot of insight on this topic. So in Thailand, when you go through, it doesn't have to be supply chain, just a major transformation of any sort in an enterprise. What would you advise another organization in order to ensure that the project and the transformation has a higher likelihood for success?
Well, I mean, definitely it's the business alignment. You can't run these projects as IT only or half have interest from the business. It must be business driven. So if you're doing supply chain, it needs to be led by the business team, not by the IT team. So it's about bringing the two groups together and moving us along.
I agree. It comes back to what I said before about executive sponsorship and that drive as to why we're going to do this. I think the other thing is, again, coming back to that change management perspective, is how do we bring these people on the journey and enable them to be able to use the outputs of this system in a different way compared to what they've done in their role previously.
All right, thank you very much. Now this is your last chance to ask a question in front of everybody. No takers. All right. If you need to talk to Paul privately, you can also approach him after the session.